shall make it stay. Make it strong. From barriers to breakthrough, we stand with pride. Sedulous collective, we're by your side. Always.
Because first of all, we're going to have Nadine Fontaine-Palmer, CEO of Mabadiliko. I believe this is Swahili, right?
Change.
Change in Swahili, exactly. I remember some things from my childhood. Now, Nadine is going to be coming at us from a slightly different angle. Her quote, as you can see, we need a fundamental transformation from research conducted into us by others to genuine, equitable partnership that breaks down traditional power structures and integrates diverse knowledge systems for outcomes that actually matter to people. So don't just say that you resonate with me because I'm from such and such community or I'm such and such minority. Please don't patronise me with that. Give me something a little bit more meaningful that shows me that you hear me, you feel me, you see me. And then we might get transformation that means something for the future. Right, enough from me, enough talking from me. I'm going to hand you over to Nadine for the first talk. Because the technical gods are not quite with us today, I'm just going to do a very quick switch here. Are you going to stand or?
I'll stand.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is just put your deck on for you.
That's a few years old of a photograph. The babies, give me 6 months. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm really glad to be here, and I just want to say first of all thank you to Silvana and the Sedulous team for not only inviting me to speak, but I think just convening this space. It's so needed. Our spaces, in our places, with our language, enough said. So I just want to honour you for what you're doing, and I'm really glad to be partnering with you. I want to talk about health research, health and social determinants research, and the kind of research that is either about health itself, clinical trials, clinical research, or things that might affect our health. So it might be housing or homelessness or transport or poverty, but things that are about the way we live and the way that our relationship with health and the way that health research plays a role in that and how I believe we should be democratising that. A quick bit about us. So we are a CIC, our roots are in South London. Don't worry about all of this writing, I'm going to be talking anyway. So our roots are really in South London, but we've come from the grassroots, and I think that's kind of the voice that we're here to represent today. We've been asked to speak about. Our earliest roots were around anti-racism and providing mental health services to Black, African and Caribbean communities in South London. But we've also, in the last few years, taken on a much bigger portfolio around public health research. So thinking about how do people feel about their health, about health services, designing health services and interventions, evaluating them on behalf of the NHS, again for communities that are, we get asked to do it with communities that are hard to reach, we call them seldom listened to. There are various phrases that are banded around, but we want to amplify the voice of the people who are rarely listened to. And as part of the VCSE sector, we're also really passionate about our role in health and health research. For decades, the VCS sector has been filling gaps in service delivery, whether it's mental health services or walks on the weekend or sports groups. The VCS sector has been active in propping up where gaps exist within the NHS, perhaps in health services, and we believe similarly there's a role for the VCS within health research also, which is massively underutilised. We are lived experience people, social scientists, behavioural scientists, so for the academics in the room, we see you, we feel you, we are you, but we also believe that there's many forms of expertise that are not tapped into if they're not in a formal bricks and mortar institution, or when they are tapped into, they're tapped into in ways that feel tokenistic, which is why again, Sedulous, thank you for putting on this event. We work with lots of people, mostly in South London historically, but also with some of the bigger research councils, Medical Research Council, Welcome, and kind of moving our compass up north increasingly. But we are basically about systems change. We're a social justice organisation, and we're trying to get to a place where research is transformative and not extractive. So when I'm talking about health research in a really simple way, what am I talking about? I'm talking about everything from discovery. So who decides what research is funded? Where does that funding come from? How is research? What research questions are we going to go after? What matters? What do we care about researching? What health conditions do people care about? Who designs that? Who does that research? And who shares it out? So that core research, whether that's kind of test tube type research or whether it's kind of going out and talking to people about their experiences of life. Then you've got kind of implementation evaluation when services might be delivered or medicines might be delivered. And then you've got outcomes that matter to people. What we find is that this very first part of the pathway, communities are rarely involved in. These are decisions that are made without us, ahead of us, and we're rarely even consulted. If we are consulted, it tends to be very tokenistic. That's either whether it's joining as a member on a board to give you advice, but actually we may or may not take that recommendation, but we did consult the community, so that's done. Or if you're a community organisation like us, you may have received emails from the NHS or others saying, you know black people, you know the disabled community, you work with the LGBT community, can you send out this leaflet please and get them to join this trial? But that's all we get. There's no back for this information, there's no engagement in the process, there's no compensation for your time or the effort that you've put into building the relationships with these communities that they want to leverage. So there's a very extractive element that happens up in the discovery element. And in implementation, when we might find out, for instance, that communities would really like to have a culturally tailored service around something, and then that's great, that makes sense, we can design that service. When commissioning happens for implementation and evaluation, that often ends up going to mainstream organisation and excludes the organisations and the communities that help them solve the question in the first place. And whether or not research is about what matters to people, communities, is another kind of misnomer. We know that funding decisions are often driven by political drivers, which are temporary, which are not necessarily aligned with our values. So we're not really often represented in any part of this life cycle, and therefore the chance that we're going to get research that matters to people is super low. And when we're talk to researchers or institutions, they say, well, they're hard to reach. It's really hard to engage with those communities. We really want to, but they don't really want to get involved. They don't trust us, we've tried. When we speak to communities, they say that they want to get involved in research. They want to be part of determining what happens with the services in their area. But there's issues around capability. How do I learn to do this? If I spent my life developing services for mothers and young people, or for young boys who we want to kind of navigate out of a violent life, if I've spent my life doing that and I've got something to contribute, when do I have the capability to step into this world in a way that makes me feel confident and secure to do that? Equity is a problem, so whose knowledge matters. There's an prioritisation of Western ways of thinking, Western science methodologies, what's evidence, what's data, what matters. Stories matter. We also have loads of evidence and data in our communities that are not harnessed. There's a sense of lack of commitment from the research institutions to actually develop communities in the VCS sectors to do this work more equitably. And as was introduced earlier on, that there's a sense that research keeps being done unto us by other people. So this is what we're hearing. It's not that we don't care or we're not engaged or we don't want to get involved. And before I do that, so here's a quote from, I hope you'll play, from one of our community members who I think summed up this systemic challenge to change. No, it's not playing, that's fine. Don't worry, I can read it out, Valerie, it's fine. Sure. What they're saying is that they're trying to do what they've always done and expecting a different result. And COVID has shown them that you're forced to deal with this problem, particularly the black community or minoritised communities. They're not going to participate in no survey, they'll rather die with all their illnesses because they don't trust you. They don't want to change because you're not changing, and this you're is to the system. You can't expect the community to change and you're not changing, that doesn't make sense. You change, they change. So this is a call to action. I think often when people come to commission our work, they want to find out why the communities don't do this or they don't do that. this is flipping the switch back, it's actually about structural systemic issues. So we want to see fundamental transformation in how health research and decision making are conducted. We want to empower all stakeholders, lived experience experts, researchers, health policymakers, community organisations to become active, integral partners through the entire health ecosystem. And we want to break down traditional power structures and hierarchies that maintain the status quo. I know I haven't got a huge amount of time, but often when we speak to institutions, they say, but this is really hard, how do we do this? It's really not that complicated. So, for instance, if you're a research funder, it's about moving from, can you still hear me, guys? Yes. It's about moving from predefined agendas about what research and how it's going to happen to some more supporting community-driven priorities by listening to communities that will matter to them. If you're a researcher or part of a research team, it's about moving from consulting at specific parts of the process which are really convenient, which tend to be recruitment. Can you help me get bums on seats for my clinical trial, please? To collaborating deeply throughout the end-to-end research lifecycle. If you're a health and social care professional, I've got some very wonderful health and social care friends in the room today. It's about not just getting feedback every now and then on services, but continuously co-designing with communities. And if you're a participant in research or a community member, it's from going from being a passive recipient of care to being an active co-creator in the entire health ecosystem. We think that this will have a transformational effect. It's not just the right thing to do, but we think it will create better research that leads to better health services and interventions. Because we believe in the VCSO as a model for doing this, this is a kind of a very crude illustration of this model we've been developing with the National Institute of Health Research, NHS England and others, which is where the former health and social care research system, call that the NHS, call that universities, call that any big kind of major institution, funding institutions, they devolve power and equitable partnership to community-based research organisations. Mabadiliko is an example of that, Sedulous is an example of that. We exist in the communities, we are researchers and we are out here. And we have these trusted relationships with grassroots organisations who have trusted relationships with residents and communities. We through that devolved power and equitable partnership and funding and all other things that go with that, we believe that collectively we can drive actionable community-driven insight back to the system. But it means doing things in a fundamentally different way, because what happens typically is that we go straight from here to here, and then they say they can't find us. I'm very aware that I'm not the first person in the world to speak about this. There'll be other panellists, but there are also those that are generations and generations before me that have been having this same conversation and driving this same change, and I'm very conscious that I stand on their shoulders. Also, I am, Mabadiliko is an example of a CIC, and there are very many like us that are black women-led, but are also intergenerational. So my mother founded this organisation in 2018. I became CEO a few years ago. She's looking after my daughter at home right now, and hopefully she'll be in the race soon. But there's something about this, when my mum comes to this, in her 60s, been doing this work in social justice for decades and decades, we've been trying to make this change. Why is it happening so slowly? We see lots of manifestos and statements and mission statements and commitments, but why are we still having these conversations about things that have been said for many, many decades? And I think it's because we often ignore the elephant in the room, that this is about humans. There's a human cost for change here. And we do a lot of sense-making workshops with researchers and institutions to say, what's stopping you from moving forward with this? What are you anxious about? And here's some of the things that probably between 400 and 500 people have been telling us now the last few years. Mainly white people in institutions that are in senior leadership roles. There's shame and discomfort about doing things differently, about saying the word racism. This is my dear colleague, Nuff, I think they shouldn't be here, but we talk about going around and shouting racism in every room we go in. That's our thing, over the line. Because it's a thing, but people don't want to call it out because of the shame and offence. They don't understand community needs. They don't necessarily believe that community's got the skills to do this work. There's a genuine thing, and I've got my PhD and I've got a PhD too. We're out here, we're doing this, right? But can I really trust you? Can I give them the money? Are they going to steward it well? It's taxpayers' money. All of this kind of mistrust that kind of goes in both directions. And there's resource constraints and there's burnout. There's often very few people who are doing this work by themselves. So we do believe that cultural humility is a really important part of this process, which is a constant reflection on our own biases, what stops us at the door, what stops us from being able to hand over power, to speak less and make space for others. It's not because we don't know the mechanics of how to do this work. People in this room can tell you how to do this work, but we're not doing it because fundamentally it comes at a personal cost. And that's what I think the elephant in the room that we should be having when we're talking to funders. It's not like the mechanics of it. It's instead of asking us why does inequality continue to exist? It's, am I ready for the personal cost of change? And that's our challenge to individuals within organisations, because organisations are aggregations of individuals who have to do something different if we want to see something different happen. Because organisations are aggregations of individuals who have to do something different if we want to see something different happen. Final slide, I promise. So we do a bunch of stuff to try to help this. This is not really a particular data sales pitch, but we want to support, and we have training to support community organisations and leaders who want to get involved in health research, demystify what this whole thing is, understand where to use their voice, how to use their voice. We do cultural humility training for researchers and institutions so that when they invite us into the room, like these rooms, to have these conversations, they check their own biases and they're ready to have conversations that have a different type of power dynamic and they don't cause more harm in the pursuit of doing good. And we create spaces where communities and researchers can have meaningful joint decisions about live major research programmes. So we believe capacity building sustainability is a big part of moving this ship forward. And for all of us, and particularly those who work in institutions, my call to action, my question to you is, are you ready for the personal cost of change? And how can you be part of that change? Thank you.